Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're venturing into the story of, well, a figure whose name really echoes through history, Genghis Khan.
Absolutely. A name everyone knows or thinks they know.
Exactly. And our guide for this is J. McIver Weatherford's book, Genghis Khan and the Making of the Modern World. Now, when you hear Genghis Khan, your mind probably jumps straight to, relentless conquest, maybe brutality.
That's the common image, isn't it? Especially in the West.
But our goal here is to look beyond that initial picture. We want to uncover the surprising layers, his life, his empire, and importantly, his lasting impact.
And that's crucial because the popular view is often so one-dimensional. It's just focusing on the destruction. But if you actually dig into historical accounts from different times, different places, a much more complex figure emerges.
Like how?
Well, it's quite striking. You've got someone like Chaucer writing way back in the 14th century.
In the Canterbury Tales.
Exactly. And he portrays Genghis Khan with this kind of awe, this sense of power, not just a brute. And even earlier, you have Roger Bacon, the English scientist in the 13th century. He actually noted the Mongols' success wasn't just force, but partly their openness to science.
That's fascinating because it really clashes with those later images, the ones that paint him as purely savage.
It does. A real contrast.
Okay, so this contrast, this complexity, that's our way in. We're dealing with someone whose story has been filtered through so many different lenses, different cultures, and the book points out a major hurdle for historians. The Mongols themselves, especially early on, didn't leave a ton of written records, no contemporary portraits, nothing like that.
Right, so we're left piecing it together from others.
Yeah, we have these varying pictures. The Chinese saw him maybe as a wise leader, the Persians as this formidable sultan, and then many Europeans just saw the barbarian.
Different perspectives, often shaped by whether they were conquered or just observers.
So what we're really trying to do in this deep dive is sift through all that. Through these, often conflicting stories, to get a clearer idea of who Genghis Khan actually was, what his conquests really involved, and how deep his influence truly ran.
Precisely. It's about moving beyond the simple caricature, understanding the nuances from all these viewpoints.
So where does this incredible story even begin? His early life wasn't exactly easy, was it?
No, not at all. Far from it. He was born Temujin, probably around 1162, likely the year of the horse, they think. And his beginnings were rooted in this really harsh environment. The Kendi Range near the Onan River, survival was, a daily struggle.
And there was that incident with his mother.
Yes, a huge event early on. His mother, Holun, was kidnapped. After that, his family, their tribe, was basically fractured. They were living as outcasts, scavengers, really on the edges of society.
Wow, a brutal start. It sounds like those early hardships must have been incredibly formative. The book mentions some really intense moments.
Oh, absolutely. These experiences forged him. Even as a kid, he showed this fierce will. Famously, he killed his older half-brother over a dispute.
Really? That young?
Yes. And later, he was captured, enslaved by a rival clan. But then he managed this daring escape. You see this resilience building, but also this capacity for both deep loyalty and, frankly, ruthless action.
It's quite something that even before hitting puberty, he formed these two really defining relationships. There was that intense friendship with a boy who later became a major enemy.
Jamuka, yes. A complex bond.
And his deep love for Borte. She became the mother of his imperial heirs.
That's right. Borte was central. It shows this complex emotional side developing even amidst all that external chaos and violence.
It's just amazing to contrast that later image, Genghis Khan the Conqueror, with these details from his youth.
What detail?
Well, the book mentions he was apparently afraid of dogs and cried easily and wasn't even physically the strongest. His younger brother was tougher.
Exactly. These little humanizing details. They really throw his later achievements into sharp relief. That transformation from a seemingly vulnerable kid into, one of history's most powerful figures. It's quite a journey.
From that kind of start to leading armies that just seemed unstoppable, the sheer scale of the conquests, it's almost difficult to wrap your head around.
It really is staggering. Think about it. In just 25 years, his armies conquered more land, more people, than the Roman Empire managed in 4 centuries.
4 centuries.
4 centuries.
Yeah.
We're talking an empire that eventually stretched across something like 11 to 12 million square miles.
Which is how big, really?
Okay, picture the entire continent of Africa, that size. Or bigger than North America today.
Wow.
Stretching from, icy Siberia down to the borders of India, east from Vietnam all the way west to Hungary, from Korea across to the Balkans. Just vast.
And the number of modern countries that fall within those old borders. It's over 30, isn't it? With billions of people living there today.
Billions, yes. It really drives home the sheer scope of his dominion. It's almost abstract. It's so huge.
And the fact that they did this with a Mongol population that was, what, maybe around 1 million people total?
Probably something like that, yes. And an army that likely never topped 100,000 soldiers at any given time.
But just makes it even more remarkable. It wasn't just numbers.
Not at all. It speaks volumes about their military skill, their organization, their strategy, which, begs the question, how did they actually do it? How did they achieve that kind of dominance with what seems like relatively limited manpower?
Right. Which brings us to their military approach. It clearly wasn't just brute force, though they were fierce warriors. The book details some really clever tactics and innovations.
Exactly. Fierce, yes, but also incredibly smart and adaptable. They were masters of surprise, for instance, and psychological warfare.
How so? Give us an example.
Okay, take a big city like Bukhara. Their approach wasn't always a full frontal assault right away. Sometimes they'd advance slowly, almost presenting themselves as traitors or a smaller force.
To lull them into a false sense of security.
Precisely. It let them gather intelligence, size up the defenses, maybe cause complacency before revealing their true strength.
And they used refugees deliberately?
Yes, that was another tactic. Sometimes they'd allow some people to flee a captured area, knowing they'd spread tales of terror ahead of the Mongol advance. This could demoralize defenders.
But they also offered terms.
They did. Often, cities that surrendered without a fight were treated relatively leniently, their people spared, maybe incorporated. But resistance, that was met with utter destruction. It was a calculated mix of fear and pragmatism.
And their adaptability in warfare. They weren't stuck in their ways.
Not at all. That's a key point. They readily borrowed and integrated weapons, technology, even siege tactics from the different cultures they fought. Chinese engineers, Persian siege masters, their skills were incorporated.
So they ended up with things like early mortars, cannons.
Rudimentary versions, yes. Giovanni, the Persian historian, described their assaults using powerful siege engines they'd adapted or had built by captive engineers. This gave them a huge advantage against fortified cities, which were the main obstacles in many regions.
And of course, the cavalry. Legendary.
Absolute legendary. Highly mobile, disciplined, able to cover vast distances incredibly quickly. They could coordinate complex maneuvers over huge areas.
And fighting on frozen rivers, turning winter to their advantage?
Yes. The Volga, the Danube. Frozen rivers became highways for them. Imagine being a European knight bogged down in heavy armor, facing these fast-moving horse archers who could attack across frozen landscapes. Terrifying.
Their siege tactics were more than just machines too, right?
Definitely. They were masters of blockade. Disrupting supply lines was crucial. They'd divert rivers to cut off water, use captured populations to build siege works, or even act as human shields. Very grim. And sometimes they'd undertake these massive engineering projects, like building entire containment walls around a besieged city, like they did at Ryazan. Complete isolation, leading to starvation or surrender.
You also mentioned they exploited internal divisions.
They were politically astute. They understood the grievances within the empires they targeted, like with the Khitan people in northern China.
They were ruled by the Jurchen, weren't they?
Yes, and resented it. The Mongols used propaganda, promised them better treatment, and managed to get many Khitan to side with them against their Jurchen rulers.
Yeah.
Divide and conquer, essentially.
It seems like there was also a real focus on preserving their own Mongol lives in battle.
That seems clear. There were even cultural taboos, apparently, around dwelling on death, injury, or defeat, almost fostering this sense of invincibility, perhaps. Keep morale high. Don't focus on losses. It likely contributed to their relentless drive.
So they conquer this vast area. But how do you actually govern it? Holding it all together seems like an even bigger challenge than winning the battles.
You're absolutely right. And Genghis Khan seems to have understood that. He wasn't just a warlord. He was consciously building a state, a nation.
With institutions.
Yes. The army was central, of course, but it wasn't just about fighting. He implemented a system of meritocracy within the army, and by extension, the administration.
Meaning people rose based on skill, not just birth.
Exactly. Loyalty and ability were rewarded. People from humble backgrounds could rise to high command if they proved themselves. This was quite radical compared to the hereditary aristocracies common elsewhere, and it fostered incredible loyalty.
A powerful tool for unity.
Definitely. And he established a unified legal code, the Yasa, sometimes referred to metaphorically as the law of the eternal blue sky.
And this applied to everyone.
That was the principle. Even the ruler, the Khan himself, was supposedly subject to the law just like a commoner. This helped create a sense of order, predictability across diverse peoples.
What about religion? That must have been complex with so many different faiths in the empire.
His approach there was remarkably pragmatic, especially for the 13th century. He basically demanded loyalty and obedience to his rule, but granted religious freedom.
Really? Complete freedom?
Largely, yes. Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, Taoists, shamanists, they were generally allowed to practice their faiths as long as they prayed for the Khan and didn't cause trouble. No forced conversions. Compare that to the religious wars happening elsewhere at the time.
It's quite a contrast.
It really is. He also abolished torture, which is noteworthy.
Though punishment could still be harsh.
Oh, yes. Banditry, assassination, treason, those were punished severely. But the arbitrary cruelty of torture was forbidden by the Yasa. He also refused to hold hostages, which was common practice then, and instituted diplomatic immunity for ambassadors, even from enemies.
Those sound like elements of, well, international law almost.
In a way, yes. Early forms of principles we value today. And to make all this administration work, they needed writing.
Right, because the Mongols didn't originally have their own script, did they?
No. So Genghis Khan ordered the adoption of a script. They adapted the alphabet used by the Uyghurs, a Turkic people, for the Mongolian language. This was absolutely crucial for codifying laws, keeping records, sending decrees across the empire.
So building the administrative framework.
Exactly. It allowed for more efficient communication and control over those vast distances. It laid a foundation that went beyond just military might.
It's such a paradox, isn't it, that the initial, often brutal conquests eventually paved the way for this huge surge in cultural contact and trade.
It is one of the most striking outcomes, a real aha moment when you study the period. Yes, the initial invasions could be horrific, devastating for those who resisted, but the long-term result of unifying such a vast area under one rule was unprecedented communication and movement.
We see that impact even in Europe, right? The Renaissance connection.
Absolutely. The increased contact with the Mongol world, direct or indirect, is seen as a major factor. It facilitated the transfer of key technologies westward, things like printing.
From China.
Likely via the Mongol routes, yes. Gunpowder and firearms, the magnetic compass, the abacus, all these innovations flowed more easily across Eurasia.
And people, too, like the Polos.
The Polo family is the classic example, isn't it? Their travels across Asia were only possible because of the relative security and the infrastructure the Mongols established. They represent that increased flow of people, goods, and ideas.
And the Mongols actively encouraged this trade.
Very much so. They understood its value. They established and maintained those famous trade routes, protected them from bandits. And they set up the YAM system, those relay stations.
Oh, yeah, the Or-2 in Mongolian.
Exactly, the YAM or Or-2. These stations were placed roughly a day's journey apart across the empire. They provided fresh horses, food, lodging, guides. It was like an imperial pony express and hotel chain rolled into one.
Making long-distance travel feasible, Marco Polo used it.
He did. He described it in detail. It was essential for merchants, messengers, officials moving across the empire.
And they have that passport system, too, the Pesa.
Yes, the Pesa. These were official tablets, often made of metal, that granted the bearer passage, protection, and access to the YAM system's resources. Different levels granted different privileges. It was like a passport and maybe even a rudimentary credit card, ensuring safe and efficient travel for those on official business or approved merchants.
So the routes opened by war became trade highways.
In essence, yes. War routes transformed into commercial arteries, connecting east and west like never before. This didn't just move silk and spices. It moved knowledge, technology, culture, even religions.
It sounds like, despite their nomadic roots, they really grasped the importance of information and logistics.
They certainly did. Their emphasis on reconnaissance before campaigns, gathering detailed intelligence, that shows an understanding of information. And their logistical feats supplying armies across vast distances, building siege works, maintaining the YAM system, were incredible.
They even mapped rivers.
Yes, there were initiatives like surveying the Yellow River source. They were interested in understanding the lands they controlled.
And shipbuilding. That came later.
It did, ironically spurred by failures. Their attempts to invade Japan and Java by sea were disastrous, partly due to weather but also naval limitations. But they learned from it, developed better shipbuilding capabilities, which then helped with maritime trade and transport within their sphere, especially in China, under Kublai Khan.
And back in the capital, Karakoram, you mentioned religious tolerance earlier. It was quite cosmopolitan.
Very much so, for its time. Accounts describe mosques, churches, Buddhist temples, Taoist shrines, all existing relatively peacefully within the city. It was a hub where people and ideas from across the empire converged, a real melting pot.
It really paints a much, much richer picture than just, warriors on horseback.
Definitely.
But turning back to Genghis Khan himself and his family, things weren't always smooth sailing internally, were they? Succession seems to have been a big issue.
Oh, yes. A classic challenge for any empire builder, and the Mongols were no different. Genghis Khan knew he needed to plan for what came after him. He intended to divide the empire among his four main sons.
Jochi, Chagatai, Ogode, and Salui.
Exactly. But when they gathered in the Great Assembly, the Kurultai, to formalize this, tensions flared up, particularly between the two eldest, Jochi and Chagatai.
Over Jochi's legitimacy, because his mother Borte had been captured early in their marriage.
Precisely. Chagatai openly questioned whether Jochi was truly Genghis Khan's son. It caused a major rift, deep resentment, that never fully healed and had consequences later on.
Despite that, Genghis Khan tried to give his sons advice, didn't he, about how to rule together?
He did. The book mentions his counsel stressing unity, the importance of having a shared vision, listening to experienced elders, avoiding distractions like excessive hunting or drinking. He warned them that a kingdom could be easily lost.
There's that metaphor he used about clothing.
Ah, yes, comparing the empire or leadership to a garment. He supposedly spoke about the comfort of an old, worn tunic versus the potential but also the risks of a brand new, untried one, the deal.
Suggesting what? Caution? Pragmatism?
Perhaps. A sense of being careful, maybe alongside the ambition. Don't discard what works, but be open to necessary change. It's insightful.
So after his death, Ogode takes over and establishes the capital at Karakoram. But it wasn't quite a grand imperial city.
Not in the mold of, say, Rome or Constantinople. Karakoram seems to have been more functional initially. A central administrative hub, a massive warehouse and workshop complex, a place for the court, but still reflecting those nomadic roots. It faced challenges, like supplying a fixed population in a harsh landscape.
And after Ogode, power dynamics shifted.
They did. When Ogode died, his wife Torjane ruled his region for several years. This period, and later the influence of other powerful women like Sorka Katani.
Tolu's widow, right?
Yeah.
Mother of future Khans like Munka and Kublai.
Exactly. It shows that women of the imperial family could wield significant political power and influence succession. The process wasn't always straightforward. The election of Munka Khan involves complex maneuvering between different family factions, notably involving Sorka and Batu Khan, Jochi's son, leader of the Golden Horde.
And Munka continued the religious tolerance with that debate.
Yes, the famous debate at Karakoram in 1254. Munkin invited representatives of different faiths, Christians, Muslims, Buddhists, to formally debate their doctrines before him.
What was the point?
Ostensibly to determine which faith was superior, though it's unlikely he expected a definitive winner. It was more a demonstration of the empire's openness and perhaps his own curiosity, a remarkable event for its time.
The expansion didn't stop with Genghis, though. His successors pushed even further. China and Europe simultaneously.
Incredible, isn't it? Massive campaigns on opposite ends of the known world. The final conquest of the southern Sung dynasty in China was a long, arduous process, eventually completed by Kublai Khan. And then there was the invasion of Europe, led by Batu Khan and the brilliant general Subutai.
Subutai, he seems to have been the mastermind behind many campaigns.
A military genius, undoubtedly. They swept into Russia first. The Battle of the Kelka River had already crushed a combined Russian-Cuban army years earlier. Then came the full invasion in the 1230s.
Destroying cities like Kiev.
Yes. Kiev, a major center, was razed in 1240. They devastated the Russian principalities. Then they turned west. Poland, Hungary.
The Battle of Liegnitz against the Poles and German knights.
A decisive Mongol victory in 1241. And just days later, another crushing victory against the Hungarians at the Battle of Mohi. Europe was thrown into panic. They seemed unstoppable.
What was the reaction in Europe? Just terror?
Terror, absolutely. Widespread fear, but also confusion. Who were these people? Where did they come from? Were they the mythical hordes of Gog and Magog? There were lots of wild theories.
But eventually, Europe learned from them.
Gradually, yes. Some military tactics, perhaps aspects of organization, but initially it was mostly fear and misunderstanding, as you see in chronicles like Matthew Paris's. They called them Tartars, associating them with Tartarus, the hell of classical mythology.
Let's shift to Kublai Khan. He represents a different phase, maybe, more settled, more integrated with China.
Definitely a significant shift. Moving the capital from Karakoram to Khanbalik, what is now Beijing, was a huge symbolic and practical move. It signaled a deeper engagement with Chinese civilization.
And he ruled more like a Chinese emperor.
In many ways, yes. He adopted Chinese administrative methods, promoted agriculture, reformed the legal system within China, even established a national history office to chronicle the dynasty. He founded the Yuan dynasty.
But the empire was still expanding, or at least defining its borders.
Yes, they were still pushing outwards, but also hitting limits. Campaigns faced setbacks or defeats at the edges against the Mamluks in Egypt, in Poland and Hungary after the initial invasions, the failed sea invasions of Japan and Java. The empire reached its maximum geographical extent.
And this period, under Kublai and even before, is sometimes called the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol Peace.
Right, because once the conquest slowed, the unified empire, despite internal rivalries, did provide a period of relative stability across Eurasia. This security allowed that trade and communication we talked about to flourish. It enabled an unprecedented integration of skills, technologies, knowledge from different cultures. Persian astronomers working in China, Chinese doctors in Persia.
But it couldn't last forever. What led to the decline?
Several factors converged. After Kublai Khan's death, the internal power struggles among his potential successors intensified. The different parts of the empire, the Yuan dynasty in China, the Ilkhanate in Persia, the Golden Horde in Russia, the Chagatai Khanate in Central Asia increasingly acted independently. Unity fractured.
And the Black Death.
A devastating blow. The plague swept across Eurasia in the mid-14th century, likely spreading along the Mongol trade routes. It decimated populations, disrupted trade, weakened the administrative structures of all the Khanates.
So we see the Mongols eventually pushed out.
Yes. In China, rebellion led to the overthrow of the Yuan dynasty and the establishment of the Ming dynasty in 1368. In Persia, the Ilkhanate disintegrated. The Golden Horde lingered longer in Russia, but gradually fragmented into smaller states, eventually conquered by Moscow.
But their influence didn't just vanish, did it?
Not at all. Even as the empire itself declined, its impact lingered. New powers that rose in its wake, think the Ottomans, the Safavids in Persia, the Mughals in India, all drew heavily on Mongol military organization, tactics, and even administrative ideas. The gunpowder empires, in a way, built on Mongol foundations.
Yet the image of Genghis Khan himself changed drastically in Europe later on.
It really did. During the Enlightenment and the colonial era, European writers often used him as the ultimate symbol of Oriental despotism and barbarity. It became a way to contrast European civilization and justify their own imperial projects. A very distorted picture emerged.
While in Asia, it was different.
Increasingly so, especially in the 20th century. As Asian nations sought independence or asserted their identity against Western influence, figures like Genghis Khan were sometimes reclaimed. Nehru, in India, acknowledged the Mongol impact. Pan-Mongolist movements saw him as unifier, a symbol of strength and resistance.
Even under the Soviets, who tried to suppress nationalism.
Yes, even then.
Yeah.
They couldn't entirely erase his significance in Mongolia itself. His birthplace became a site of, well, quiet national pride, even if overt celebration was discouraged. His legacy was too fundamental.
So ultimately, looking back at everything, his impact on the modern world is just undeniable.
Absolutely undeniable. He connected continents through commerce and communication in ways never seen before. His empire fostered, maybe unintentionally, the rise of larger, more secular states, and it forced this incredible mixing of cultures, technologies, ideas across Eurasia.
And as Weatherford describes from his time in Mongolia, for Mongolians today, this isn't just ancient history.
No, it's deeply personal. Genghis Khan is a foundational figure, a core part of their national identity, their heritage, their connection to a past of immense global significance.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it's really clear, isn't it? The legacy of Genghis Khan is so much more complex, so much more multifaceted than that simple image of the barbarian conqueror.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We've hit on some real aha moments, I think. The sheer scale and speed of what he achieved, for one. But also the innovations in governance, the rule of law, the unexpected promotion of trade and cultural exchange. and how his story has been told and retold so differently over time.
We hope this exploration has given you, our listener, a richer, more nuanced context for understanding this really pivotal figure in world history, moving beyond those often one-dimensional takes.
Which brings us to a final thought for you to ponder. Considering the colossal scale of his conquests and the really diverse, sometimes contradictory impacts of his rule, how does grappling with Genghis Khan challenge our usual narratives? You know, those often Western-focused ideas about civilization versus barbarism.
Yeah. And what parts of his complicated legacy, both the positive and the negative, the constructive and the destructive, do you think still echo in our interconnected world today? Something to think about.